Anesu, thanks for being with us here today. Just want to see if you want to start out telling us a bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from.
So I'm from Portadown, lived in Portadown for about a decade. So I'm doing studying nursing at Queen's, and that's what I've been doing for the past nearly a year now. And so I'm turning 19 soon and just trying to figure out life, I guess.
As we're still trying to figure out our lives as well.
Don't tell me that.
Yeah, I know, it's not great. So you do some poetry. Can you tell us a bit about that? How did you get into that? What are your inspirations there? How did that start?
Yeah, I started when I was about 14. So I was in a youth organisation and I wanted to plan a Black History Month event. So we were planning workshops, things like that. And he was like, okay, but what about you? What do you like to do? What do you want to do to make it personal? And I was like, well, I guess I write a little bit. And he was like, okay, go write a poem and then we'll do that for Black History Month. I was like, okay. Went off, wrote this poem called Where Am I From? And it was inspired by a lot of American things. So one of my biggest inspirations when I was starting was Ndozaki Shange, who wrote for coloured girls. And that was really my big interest, this idea that poem was this performance thing. And I really loved slam poetry and spoken word poetry and things like that. So that was what my focus was for that. And I just sort of kept going, just kept writing.
And before we get more into the poetry, I want to ask you a bit more about your background. You're from Northern Ireland originally, but do you want to talk about some of your heritage and where that comes from?
Yeah. I'm born in Northern Ireland, born in Antrim, but my mum is South African. So she is from Port Elizabeth. So she came here 2 years before I was born. So it's a really weird thing. We have this joke that she's more Northern Irish than I am because she's been here a wee bit longer. But yeah, I've always had that weird split. I'm Northern Irish, but I've had a lot of African things in my life where food, culture, going to cultural events and having different holidays and things like that. So it's always something that I've known that even though I'm Northern Irish in that way, that I'm also a bit of something else.
Yeah, you're from here but connected to other places as well. And do you think that influences your poetry quite a bit?
Definitely, yeah. What I write about is different. If I read I don't read a lot of Irish poetry, and I've been trying to change that. I've been trying to improve it, but a lot of my poetry is influenced by American Black poets and things like that, because that's the closest experience that I've had. Because even though my mum is African, I've never really felt very African in myself. So it's not the poetry that I read, and Irish poetry is not the poetry that I read, but I read about Black experience sort of diasporically, whatever, in that way.
But I think that's a great thing. I mean, Northern Ireland, certainly this island, has a rich poetry history. And do you feel that you're kind of part of this new generation of adding to that tradition?
Yeah. I did a project last year of 21 artists, and it was me and there was 2 other poets that I was working with, and they were just absolutely wonderful, and they had such a rich understanding of Irish poetry. So it was nice to talk to them and be introduced to all these new poems that have just, I said new poems to me, that they've existed for about 100 years. And it was just so interesting to see how poetry is changing in Northern Ireland. This idea that young people are coming up and it's shifting less from this historical understanding of what Northern Ireland is. Especially last year was the centenary, and we were it was a centenary project, but we weren't writing about that. We were just writing about what we are and how it is to belong in Northern Ireland and what it means to be a poet in Northern Ireland going into 2021 and 2022. It's just changing. Yeah,
becoming more diverse, which is obviously a great thing to see.
Yeah, it's good for me.
And you said you pull from maybe different movements in the US and around the world. Can you talk about some of these movements and how they've maybe inspired you or in your work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously 2020 was a really rough year for everyone, and the surge, because it wasn't the creation of Black Lives Matter, but that surge of Black Lives Matter and that surge of awareness around racial language and the way that we talk about race, I think was really important, because I think it was very shocking for people to find out that racism was not just an American thing. And obviously Black Lives Matter was very American-centred in that sense, that it started with the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and things like that. But I think it was that shifting the conversation, that for Black people in Northern Ireland, we had to be okay, but there's Black Irishness and there's Black Britishness, and what does racism mean for us, and how are we going to talk about that, and how are we going to centre ourselves in that conversation about what it means to be Black.
And I guess another question to add to that, what does it mean to be a poet in Northern Ireland today?
It's a hard question. I honestly,
put you on the spot.
Yeah. For me, genuinely, it is just I live in Northern Ireland and I am a poet. I don't really think about it in that sense.
That's great. Yeah.
What does it mean to write for Northern Ireland, and what is my Northern Irish identity? Because if you try to sit and talk about identity in Northern Ireland, you'd be caught in a couple of webs. So I just write whatever comes to me, and I don't really think about what it means until it's read by someone else. I think it's very personal to me until someone else reads it and goes, oh, this is like a perspective that I never thought about, or I never thought about Northern Irishness in this way. And I think it's more interesting then to let other people read it and figure out whatever it means for them.
As someone maybe from, well, you're through and through Northern Irish, but as someone that may be perceived to be from a minority background, how are race relations today? Do you think that they're better than they were maybe 10 years ago? Where are we?
Yeah, I think because of Northern Ireland's history and because of all the things that Northern Ireland has been through in the last 40 years, it's very stuck. And I feel like Northern Ireland hasn't really been ready for the conversation about immigration and new identities and diverse identities yet, because it's just sort of been stuck in its own, trying to figure itself out. People are, even in Northern Ireland, trying to figure out, well, what does identity mean? To then have people coming in and being like, oh, I don't know anything about Northern Ireland, I'm just whatever. And then having kids, and the kids are like, well, what is it then? Because they've got that Northern Irish thing that's going on, and then they've got their own identity. And I think it's almost this, I thought about it the other day, and I thought it was like a transplanted organ almost, that Northern Ireland is just not really ready yet to have that conversation. And I think it's just sort of pushing it slowly and be like, hey, can we maybe have it now? In that way.
And do you think that poetry has, transformative powers, if you will, when it comes to conflicts, race issues, all those kind of social issues? Do you see it as a mechanism for building understanding between people?
I do, yeah, because for me, poetry is the most personal thing that I do. Writing poems, because I do it in my room. I do it when I'm the most upset or the most happy or whatever. When I'm in the most extreme of emotions, that's when I find that I write the most poetry. So I think that microcosm of just personal experience, it's inevitable then that opens up a conversation, because when people read something that's really personal, it's actually really universal, and people find, oh, that's an experience that I felt before, that's an experience that I can relate to, even if I'm not Black or even if I'm not a second generation immigrant, things like that. So it's oh, okay, well then this is the experience that other people are having, and we could have these conversations. And I do think that it opens it up a lot because it is so personal and so small in that way.
Yeah, and I think, it can only benefit local people to have voices from a South African background. The issues in Northern Ireland aren't specific to Northern Ireland. They're issues all around the world, and it's good to see, probably for locals, that that there's other ways to deal with these issues, I imagine. Transferring on from that, I'm wondering, can you give us maybe a snippet of one of your poems?
Yes, I'm a very bad poet that I don't have them all memorized. So this is from my poem, The Sleepover, which was dedicated to my friend and our relationship that we had. So I'll just give these stanza here if I can just memorize it. I keep the photos of you in my room, tarnished reflections covering every inch in such a way that if taken down, the paint would flake away and the wall would blush with exposure, revealing that something was missing.
Amazing. I think probably really my last question for you, Anesu, is what are your plans for the future?
I'm very busy with school and stuff like that and doing placement, but I think just to keep writing, I want to just write as much as possible. And I think even just changing the way that I'm writing, because it's been very sporadic up to now, where I just feel like I'll not write anything for months and then I'll write 20 poems. And I think I just want to implement it more in my everyday life, or just trying to find ways to just write all the time, because it is a muscle, and the more you use it, the stronger it gets, and the more you can then expand it.
Anesu, for sure, last question. How here-ish do you feel now?
Yeah, I feel very here. I feel that I don't really think about identity in that way of labels and trying to figure out what I am or who I am and trying to explain myself, but I feel very present in where I am. I feel very part of life in Belfast or in Portadown, and I feel very grounded in the people I know and the experiences I have, even if I'm not too sure how to articulate them, which I guess is what the poetry is doing. So yeah, I feel here-ish.